I'm always entertained and interested in the comments which are put on the site. Yasmin Page says, "What conduct was that?" Talking about Lynch and Connolly's imprisonment. The judge had all the evidence you don't possess. I say again that if this man was so ill, what was he doing at the protest? He is a grown man who should lead by example. People can make mistakes. Like you said, he was a father, a grandfather. Was that a good look for his family? No. Nigel Farage and others like him who helped to spread mass mis and disinformation should be held accountable to stamp this out. And I absolutely agree. This is where I'm afraid I was perhaps being a little elliptical, but I think that while we don't hold these people, these senior politicians, responsible for the misinformation and the disinformation that was spread after the death of the children in Southport. We and while we have pilloried and imprisoned people like Peter Lynch, who frankly was following the crowd and following the and following the sort of social media tropes that were being put out, I think we are in danger, genuinely, of having a two-tier policing system. We have to be thorough and we have to be clear. And I would not in any way want to endorse Farage's system. And I know that the Farage people and the Isabel Oakeshots and the Richard Tices and all these individuals are stomping the ground and saying that Peter Lynch was a political prisoner, a martyr, that this is justice gone wrong. Yes, I agree it's justice gone wrong, but not for the reason that they're suggesting. I also agree that it's two-tier policing, but not for the reason that they're suggesting. It's two-tier policing because those individuals who have Twitter accounts and access to GB News and Talk TV and who can put out their views in a questionable way, maybe simply by asking questions, are igniting a base of individuals who are frustrated, and frustrated particularly by the failures of the very things that they wanted, as Brexit. The things they were promised would come out of Brexit have not materialised, and instead Farage and the right wing have paraded immigration as a direct target for this frustration. I think if we fail to recognise that there are leaders in our society who have manipulated the impressionable and the weak and the foolish, and then we punish the weak, the foolish, the impressionable, and we let these grandees off with a nudge and a wink, we are failing justice. Now, should people be imprisoned for what I think on Talk TV they were talking about hurty words? Should people be imprisoned for hurty words? I think we have to be very careful, because we have to preserve free speech. We have to preserve the right to protest. But at the same time, that right comes with the understanding that we must not put other people's lives and freedom in danger. And it's absolutely right for the country to protect the freedom and the lives of those individuals that it's placed into hotels in some sort of suspended animation, some sort of limbo, because the Home Office is effectively on strike, operating under a hostile environment. and not actively processing all the asylum claims which are being put forward. And that in turn is part of the Brexit crisis, because that in turn is a result of Lord Frost's failure to negotiate an alternative to the Dublin III Protocol. And that alone explains the small boat flotilla that seems impossible to stop. Now, in the last few days in the news, there's been some very interesting articles suggesting that Europe is now waking up to the fact that it has its own immigration crisis, as do we. Yes, of course. Yes, of course. Europe has had an immigration crisis for 20 years. It's managed to ignore it by throwing all the problems to the south of Europe, throwing all the problems to the place where the immigrants arrived, to Greece, to Italy, to Spain. And those are the poorer European countries that simply do not have the money and the resources to manage the huge numbers who are arriving. Now, I remember seeing migrants arriving in Greece. I remember the conditions in which they were kept in Lavrion and in the various camps around Greece, in Crete and so on. I was personally involved in a situation where some of the migrants had been tortured by the Greek Coast Guard, and I took the case, I helped to take the case through the European courts, and we were eventually successful. But part of that success involved an undertaking by the Greek government at the time to change the law in 3 different respects, and that has never happened. And I find that deeply regrettable. The only way to deal with the problem of immigration is to go back to the 1951 Refugee Convention. These fantasy projects to offshore immigration, whether in the Rwanda scheme, which was abusive in the extreme and was based on a lie, the lie that the Rwanda government is safe. It isn't safe. And given the fact that the Rwanda government has still not thoroughly explained and investigated and published details about the suspicious deaths of, I think, 13 refugees in 2018, it's had time. I don't think that it's a place where the British government should ever trust that it can offshore migrants to be processed in any form. As for the idea that migrants would not have any right to apply to Britain for refuge, however they came, that is in defiance of the 1951 Refugee Convention. However we legislate to avoid that, it's against the spirit of the 1951 Refugee Convention. The Giorgia Meloni situation in Albania is a little better, but it has already been overturned by the courts, and it is at the very edge of legal acceptability, and I think the courts are not prepared to push that far. So we come back down to the situation that the only hope is to renegotiate the 1951 Refugee Convention. And that means a global conference. We had every opportunity to do that two years ago when Rishi Sunak came into power, and that would have been a good use of his short time in office. He could have hosted a global conference to deal once and for all with the Refugee Convention. That would have been a useful product. Instead, he leaves office with nothing of value to his name, which is very sad. So in much the same way as Theresa May and Liz Truss, and to a certain extent Boris Johnson. It's It's regrettable that we've had a string of appalling prime ministers. It doesn't need to continue. Who is it now? Brendan Cowell talks about an organisation. I'm not quite sure what he's talking about, but he says that I'm a communist, but I regard monarchy and the state church as essential ramparts of liberty against the likes of Farage, Lee Anderson, and everything they stand for. I'm inclined to agree with you on that. I think it is important that there is something greater than a politician. And the monarchy and the state church certainly offer that, certainly play that role. I don't think the state church has led sufficiently by example in the issue of immigration or in the issue of Brexit. It could have led more. There were gestures of the Archbishop of Canterbury and so on, but they weren't big enough and they were too late. But that is why they are in the House of Lords. They are there to do that job. Drop Dude John says that the Lynch thing has nothing to do with Brexit and it's not anti-immigrant. It's anti-illegal immigration, not anti-immigration. You really are Richard Head when you change language to manipulate it to the purposes of propaganda. No, I don't. Drop Dude John. And I don't like being called Richard Head. It's very silly. The language has already been manipulated. The 1951 Refugee Convention makes it quite clear that an immigrant arriving on our shores is to be welcomed if they apply for asylum, and it doesn't matter how they get to our shores. And that is precise. It's Suella Braverman who defined people as illegal migrants on the basis of how they arrived at our shore. Our British understanding of illegal migrant was somebody who had not got the correct papers, somebody whose papers had expired, and somebody who was not claiming asylum, or somebody who had their asylum application rejected. At that point, they become automatically an illegal immigrant. So when it comes to nomenclature, I simply use the language that precedes, that antedates the Suella Braverman legislation, and I fully hope and expect all of that legislation to be repealed, because if it is not, it makes a nonsense of Keir Starmer's current policy regarding immigration, which, of course, is not really working. But it cannot work. The only thing that can work is a global response. And then, following that global response, in redefining who is and who is not eligible for asylum as a prerequisite, then I think it's absolutely essential that we set up consulates on the northern shore of Africa, on the northern shore of France, on the southern shores of Europe. Because without doing that, and starting the process before applicants get to our country, because without doing that, we are encouraging the use of small boats across the Mediterranean or across the Channel. And we are complicit in this abominable trade.